This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and possibly our producer, Simon Slater. Episode number 115.
Five.
Hello, Timothy.
How you doing? There's some interesting news out there. I don't know. Do you want to share some stories with me?
Well, I'd say that I have obviously have always been negative, but my recent test came back negative. I've always been negative.
Well, we just as some of the listeners might have noticed with our intros before, we were kind of on the road living our road life. We're back in our New York apartments, and we're going to do a show tomorrow. But we went into red country, and everyone talks about the breakthrough cases. The vaccines work. I mean, those are things to be worried about, but we were kind of in the red zone, and we all kind of got through.
And also, look, there's a lot of talk, and we've heard this too, that people who have been double vaxxed still get it, but they recover quickly, or two people in a family get it and the others don't. I said, look, I really feel that we're probably all going to get it, and the ones that have been vaxxed are going to get over it quickly until the next variant comes up. So I don't know what to say about that.
Well, one thing
terrifying.
I'll run with it. It seems, the pandemic, these mega storms, global warming, and now Canary Islands, are exploding with this volcano eruption, and there's between Etna in Sicily and whatever the one's called up in, which I've seen in person up in Iceland. I can never pronounce it right. I should say. It does feel a little doomsday-ish.
It certainly does. And as a matter of fact, I'm just reading an article that's the title is "A Warning Sign of Mass Extinction is on the Rise." Scientists say toxic microbial blooms thrive during the Great Dying, the most severe extinction in Earth's history, and they're proliferating again due, of course, to human activity. Now, anybody, you know this, Tim, freshwater, river, lake, you've seen warning signs about harmful algae. And also, this family that was hiking recently, they all died, and they think it was from drinking a poison river that had this algae bloom in it.
Yeah, God.
And the new report suggests that these blooms are early indicators of ongoing ecological disaster caused by humans and the eerie parallels of the worst extinction event in Earth's history. So, of course, the last one was 250 million years ago. I think we're time for another one. It was called the Permian event, the Great Dying, and it wiped out nearly 90% of the species on Earth. Ooh. So ominous parallels of that of people are now showing up on Earth. And, according to a team of scientists led by Chris Mays, a postdoctoral researcher and a paleobotanist at the Swedish Museum of Natural History in Stockholm, we should be very concerned, especially about toxic algae, bacterial blooms. And this is what's happening. It's happening in lakes and rivers, and not only the pollution of all of these with all of the crap we put in it, but we're on the edge. We're on the edge. Of course, humans are roaches. It's our can't get rid of us all.
Well, speaking of humans being roaches, a man in Kinloch, Pennsylvania, opened fire at a baby shower event. It must have been a bunch of firemen because it was in their fire department building, and I guess it was a dispute over some gifts given in the baby shower, and Isaiah Jermaine Hampton decided to shoot into a crowd of 25 people, friends and family. No one died. 3 were rushed to the hospital. It wasn't an active shooter thing. It was basically a temper tantrum about the gifts presented at a baby shower, and he decided to take out his gun and just start shooting at his own family.
Well, speaking about assholes, we just came back from Florida a couple of weeks ago, and we all know that Orlando is one of the top places for most assholes to congregate, as well as Miami. Right. But a Florida cop from hell charged over a nightmare anal probe. An ex-cop with a history of discipline for making inappropriate comments and using excessive force against, of course, Black residents, has been criminally charged with sexual battery for an assault on a Black man during a traffic stop, the Orlando Sentinel reported. So Jonathan Mills, a former officer, more like orifice of the year, the Orlando Police Department decided to search a Black man who was a passenger in a car that had been stopped by police because they believed falsely that it belonged to a suspect. In other words, guilty for driving while Black. Now, the car was not the one they were after, but Mills roughly searched the man's genitals and butt for
Oh
drugs.
boy. Oh God.
And didn't find any there. And of course, the poor man said, I never felt so violated in my life. Now,
Well, yeah.
Officer of the Year eventually faced discipline in 2016 for comments he made, for taunting teens, for grabbing teens, trying to fight them. And this just goes on and on and
So
on.
he's nuts. He's nuts.
On. Well, Officer of the Year, Orlando, Florida. That's what happens there. What are you going to do? Not go there, I guess. Well, I mean, this might actually make a racist happy. Scientists created the world's whitest paint, and it could eliminate the need for air conditioning. The whitest paint in the world has been created in a lab at Purdue University, a paint so white that it could eventually reduce or even eliminate the need for air conditioning. The paint has now made it into the Guinness World Book of Records as the whitest ever made. So why do the scientists create such a paint? Turns out that the breaking of a world record wasn't the only goal. Curbing global warming was. So they started this project about 7 years ago, but it's actually starting. The idea is to make a paint that would reflect sunlight away from a building, and it's working. So the paint reflects 98.1% of solar radiation while also emitting infrared heat. So it absorbs less heat from the sun than it emits.
Oh.
And the surface that is painted with it is then cooled and cools the surrounding area. And using this paint to cover a roof area of about 1,000 square feet could result in a cooling power of 10 kilowatts, more powerful than air conditioning. I can't wait.
That's amazing.
Love it.
I love it when there's things. Well, when science like that is used for, I guess, good is always nice. Now, when science is used for quote unquote bad, that's always interesting. So the Pentagon is really freaking out about this Havana Syndrome. And basically since 2016, at the embassy in Havana, Cuba, the American one, a bunch of ambassadors and CIA workers started getting ill with
mysterious symptoms.
Yeah, nausea, headache, weird pains, vertigo, and of course they're saying it's in your head, and they're keeping it secret, and then of course it leaked. Now, since Joe Biden's been elected, because they're like, it's just in Cuba, they think it's microwaves that are being weaponized.
I think it's happened in a few other places as well.
Well, since Biden's been elected, there's been 24 new cases in Europe, and they're thinking, it's some Russian Cold War kind of thing going on, but there's also targeting family members who are connected to, who are getting it. And this summer, they passed a bill called Havana, which stands for helping American victims afflicted by neurological acts or something. Yeah. So,
well, look, I mean, whether it's another man-made targeted event, the thing is, we're all being fucking nuked because we're surrounded by electricity. People are on their phones or computers all day long. We are surrounded by towers, power towers. There are underground cables. We're being fucking nuked. So whether you get the Havana Syndrome or not, and I started talking about electrical poisoning quite a long time ago because I felt like I had it because I was so being somebody who is so electrically charged myself. I mean, I can get pretty agitated around hyperelectricity.
Well, because initially in Havana, because mass hysteria does happen. People in a room can collectively hallucinate together, as witnesses in court cases have shown, where you'll see video evidence and they actually did see it collectively in their minds. But
hey, we've seen mass hallucinations for the past 5 fucking years.
Well,
make assholes go away.
Well, they didn't know if what was really going on in Havana, but now that it's happening all over the world, and it's terrifying when something really is happening, but they don't know what's going on, and it's like, is it in your mind? Then you start there's self-doubt,
well,
and
that's why I'm leaving it up to you, Tim.
Okay,
what? Your control of your sonic essence to make something sonically that reverses the Havana Syndrome, or simply makes people shit their pants,
like a laser beam base as a weapon. Like
I feel you
to block it. Well,
Tim, you block a lot of bullshit coming in my direction, so I think you already have that laser beam surrounding me as a protective device. Thank you very much.
There are force fields, and sometimes individuals can take on bigger things. Leading into my next story, a gourd grizzly bear was found.
I'd like a gourd the size of a grizzly bear. In other words, a pumpkin that big. Go ahead.
A gourd grizzly bear was found near Lake Louise in Alberta, Banff, National Park. Beautiful. If you have never been there. And they had to bring out the forensic teams because the grizzly bears are protected. And so they concluded that a mountain goat defending itself stabbed this thing with its sharp horns in the throat and the armpit, where there's a major artery.
Wow.
And basically took on something just considerably bigger and stronger, but was just a better fighter. And this mountain goat fucking just destroyed the fuck out of this grizzly bear.
I recently saw a video of a black and white house cat chase a coyote off of somebody's property. So,
well, that's impressive.
As I like to say,
coyote usually wins that one. So that's impressive.
It's not size; it's tenacity that matters. I'm very excited about this project that's happening on the streets of New York this week.
Okay.
A uterus vending machine is coming to New York City, and no, it won't be for snacks. Although my legs are spread, I wouldn't mind. Prepare to see a uterus-adorned vending machine taking up space in Soho on Thursday, September 23rd. Designed by the Pill Club, a women's telehealth company, New Yorkers will be able to find this rather unique vending machine on the corner of Houston and Lafayette. Now, in lieu of Doritos, candy bars, or other typical vending machine goodies, this one will be stocked with period care products, condoms, emergency contraception, and much more to kick off World Contraception Day, which is on Sunday, this coming Sunday, September 26th. Now, though condoms can be purchased at every corner store, women's healthcare products, such as birth control, is not that easy, and it may be becoming less easy to more and more difficult to come by, and requires a prescription. Now, with nearly 11 million Americans taking birth control, and Tim, you know my favorite form of birth control, vasectomy.
Okay.
I'm going to have a vending machine that gives vasectomies. The Pill Club is hoping to signal how easy it should be for women to obtain healthcare by setting up this vending machine in order and also normalizing birth control. Now, this is what will be in the machine. The Pill Club special edition stickers, never before seen condoms and lubricant products from the Pill Club, tampons, pads, phone case that holds birth control pill packs, honey pot normal wipes and normal wash, drip stick, I don't even know what that is, and vitamins. The event is entirely open to the public and welcomes everyone to stop by and take pictures and purchase any products they may need. I think this is a fantastic idea.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I love it.
I'm all for such things.
I really want to invent a vending machine that you stick your dick in and a fucking long needle comes out and goes right up there and just trims that semen, just cuts that little tie forever.
Oh boy.
We can do it the easy way, or we can do it the Lydian way, you know me.
That sounds pretty brutal.
Yes. Well, honey, you know, I go gentle.
You're implying you'd be hiding in the vending machine and doing it yourself like I see eyes. What's going on?
Instead of a photo booth, it'd be like a porno vasectomy booth. I'm really gonna patent this idea. The thing is, I can only be on one corner at a time, but I have two hands, so step right up.
That must have happened in the
history. It'll be a glory-less hole. Ouch.
That must have happened in the history of the planet where someone kind of like a weird creeper stalker was hiding in a vending machine, and like someone like puts their hand in to get something, like they grab it, like, hey, someone's in there. That must have happened.
Only a creep like you or me would come up with something like this.
I'm going to use this platform because I have to give myself a shameless plug.
I'd like to give you a shameless plug, all right?
Oh, well, I'm sure you would.
That's my new sex line, shameless. Damn, I'm worth today I'm full of $1 million ideas.
Oh, my God.
I won't get a dime for them, but go ahead.
Well,
plug yourself, Timmy.
On Tuesday, the 28th, which is next week, my solo album is going to be finally out. But you can pre-order it now on Timdahl, TIMDAHL.bandcamp.com. It's just me on bass and microphone, recorded real time, no overdubs, but there's all types of little magic and wizardry going on. So it seems like a lot of things are happening. It's pretty avant-garde. It's not a real sing-along material, but I'm proud of it. And I encourage our listeners to check it out and maybe consider buying it.
Well, I think they should buy it so that you can get your second solo LP out as quickly as possible, which is going to be the funkier, groovier side of Tim Dahl.
Maybe it will, yes. So there it is, and timdahl.bandcamp.com. Check it out.
All right. Well, speaking about solo performers that are amazing and have been doing a lot of incredible work for many years, and a good friend of mine, and somebody who also works with a lot of other people, we have Vanessa Skantze on tonight's show. Butoh, spoken word, musical performance artist, runs her own theater. And that's
Yes.
what the Lydian Spin
Force
is
of
offering.
nature.
Yeah, absolutely. It is what the Lydian Spin has on that hot little platter tonight, bringing it right into your ear space. What more do you want? This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and a very good friend of mine for many decades, who I recently had the pleasure of spending a few days with on the Retrovirus tour. Vanessa, I like to refer to her as the queen of the Teatro della Psychomachia. She's a spoken word artist, Butoh extraordinaire, yoga master, teaches in prisons, has had a very varied and multidisciplinary career. And I'm quite proud to say that I plucked her out of an audience in Washington, D.C., where we just finished our tour. Welcome, Vanessa.
Great to be here.
And the weird thing about that is you were at one of the shows in a beautiful church we played in. I believe that was that Newport, Kentucky? I'm not sure.
Yes.
But I had a bunch of Japanese Teenage Jesus t-shirts and I said, well, Vanessa, do you want one? Because I wasn't selling them. And you said, I'll take this one. And it happened to be, I had no idea of it, the show that I actually proposed to you because you were there for 2 nights. Like, who are you? And that shirt was a flyer from that gig. And again, we always talk about the Lydian Spin and the connective tissue.
Yeah, amazing. The Java-rama.
So you came to my spoken word show. You're sitting in the front row, if I recall, 2 nights, maybe 2 different theaters. What the hell? What the hell happened?
I was kind of drifting through life at the moment, working at Tower Records, where a lot of us hit in our drift. It was a solo spoken word at Java-rama, and that was the first night. And the second night was a show with Rollins at the old DC Space, which was really a wonderful venue in DC, very much missed. I saw everyone from you to Don Cherry to Sun Ra to Jim Carroll to, incredible venue.
How long were you living in DC at that point? Because you moved around a lot as a child and adolescent and teenager.
I was in DC, I think about the better part of 2 years before moving to Brooklyn.
What years were they?
They must have been 86, 87, there, that time frame.
You're at my show. You're in the front row. I'm picking up, and it's bizarre because we've had a few other witchy gals on here who I've done the same. It's funny. I never pick men out of the audience, but I think I just went up to you and I don't know if I asked you then, but I know at one point I said, what about those volumes of writing under your bed?
You sat down and bought me a beer and nodded at me. It was during Rollins's set.
The beginning of a multi-decade friendship.
All right. And so then the relationship starts at that point, or did you guys kind of like, it was just an acquaintance and then you kind of ran into each other again? Or was it like you guys are staying in touch from that moment on?
There was an address exchange. This was, pre-internet, cell phone, all of that. So
you used to send postcards and letters.
Postcards and letters. And I came up to New York and we met there. And I eventually decided to move. And that was when I started doing whatever you wanted me to do for Widow Speak and what have you.
Vanessa wrote a lot of my early press releases, which were amazing. And once she wrote those, I'm like, okay, get those volumes from under the bed, honey. I know you got them. And I knew she did. Now, I know that Vanessa had done theater or, adolescent, teenage stuff before. But Vanessa, tell me about how I actually prompted you to take to the stage, especially when Vanessa's material, and you can go to Bandcamp and hear the album I produced called Pariah. And it's very internal. It's really about, a lot of female and the child's depression about just the trauma of birth under the horror of the nuclear family, especially any family.
As I recall, the first thing that happened was actually recording Pariah in Brent's bathroom. Not the CD, but that text.
And this was in New Orleans. So we were in Brooklyn for a while, but then we both moved to New Orleans.
Yes, I followed you because I mean, Brooklyn was nowhere for me. I was in a relationship that was not good. And that seemed as good a choice as any.
So you came down to New Orleans after I came, which I'm so happy you did. And that's really where you started to come into your own about performance and tell us about, yeah, I mean, look, New Orleans was great at that period. Tell me what years those were. And because then you came down and just give us that trajectory of what happened with your performance, not only spoken word, but et cetera.
So I believe I came down at the end of 1990. It was not very long after you left Brooklyn. And I just came down, I looked around, I found a $275 apartment in the Irish Channel. And I think my brother drove me down with all my cats, because I've always had a lot of cats. And there I was. Yeah, I think the initial, you soon after recorded Shotgun Wedding. And then
with Roland S. Howard, yes. With Roland S. Howard.
And I got to meet Roland and he borrowed my guitar, which was an amazing thing for that recording. And then, yeah, Brent recorded you doing something and me doing, and I think that's kind of how I started, and we did the tours together.
Booked by James Faherty, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Booked
We
by
just ran
James
into not that long ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so we recorded at Brent Newman's house, who was in New Orleans, really bizarre balladeer of, I mean, what was the name of his main song, Vanessa, about you love?
You Killed My Love.
You Killed My Love was his main song. A very sour.
Glenn Styler.
I did a recording with him, a very sour balladeer who became our good friend. And so we recorded, I didn't even realize that we first did like a recording in the bathroom of part of Pariah. And then I just said, that's it, we're going on tour, as I often do to people.
This is kind of what I remember. It's a swirling maelstrom of time, but we did, I think there was one tour that I just drove, and that's when.
By the way, James Faherty still has traumas about Vanessa Leadfoot, Lucky, as we like to call her, driving in a torrential downpour, probably 90 miles an hour. And he still remembers the record you were playing. I can't remember what it was right now, but.
Where were you during this downpour?
Texas, Florida. We did a lot of that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Vanessa,
it was a hailstorm in Florida.
Vanessa, yeah. I always thought it was very brave that you said, okay, I'm going to do spoken word, because you're writing. I want to go back to your writing for a minute. She's the most literary and the most elegant writer, and really dealing. It's bizarre because we were so opposite. Vanessa was dealing with really internal issues, and I was, and about how you stab yourself to death, thank you, with your parents' knives. And I was turning the knife outward and talking more of a political thing. It was a very unique combination. Can you talk a little bit about that, Vanessa, please?
Again, I'm a little hazy, but I think that the first show that I actually did was at Emo's in Houston. And I just remember, I mean, I was certainly, and it was packed, and I was certainly somewhat nervous, but I just remember that sense of wanting to just kind of pierce outward. And there was a very specific focus of just kind of cutting through that was, the energy I was trying to find to, do this thing. And it was very powerful, and it was very different because I'd performed when I was younger. I'd done theater, as you said, but it was always unsatisfying. But just doing my own words, doing my own work was where I really thought something can come through now. It isn't just me trying, something can come through. So I remember that experience very clearly. I remember it was kind of a high up stage looking out over people, and then we kind of continued on that Texas Cactus Cafe.
And let's face it, Texas and Florida were never the easiest places for spoken word, but nonetheless, we kept going back. And I got goosebumps just hearing about that show, because there had to be some crowd control going on. And but the thing is, I remember that whenever you took the stage, I mean, you had such presence and such command of what you were saying that I think people were always really respectful of what you were doing right from the first show. And it never appeared as if you had any nerves at all.
But you do so many other things besides spoken word, and obviously Butoh, and your yoga. I've never even taught you about yoga. Are you a master? Or is this just a thing you just do regularly? I have no idea.
And that was back to New Orleans again too.
Well, yeah, it's going back to New Orleans. So when does all the stuff that you do start coming together? It's if you're a maximalist like you are, when do you start tying all the threads together and expressing it as just who you are? When do you see this point, or when do you start doing this combination hybrid?
I started moving towards, so from the strict spoken word, here's the text, here's the microphone. I was interested in starting to do more of a performance. So I began writing pieces. Eye of the Beholder was the first, which I performed also somewhat on the East Coast. Hour plus length of text, memorizing the text, and then having some physical theater along with it. And I continued doing these longer performance works. As I did them, the physical theater aspects became more important to me. I had one piece where I strung ropes, and I actually twisted myself out on the ropes and fell into the audience while doing this textual stuff. I started to bring in a little more vocals, song kind of.
And by the way, Vanessa has an amazing rock, blues, and jazz voice. I mean, really, she can throw that. I'd like to see her and Weasel in a karaoke standoff.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
We'll get to that eventually.
But this is all in New Orleans it's New Orleans where you're starting to realize just this kind of performance. I don't even want to label this, but what you are, what you've become as a performer. And is that basically the city where this starts really kind of coming to your voice?
Completely. And there was so much freedom there, because really there was no one there. And unlike someone who went to school and got a degree or was in a place where I was seeing a lot of people doing this kind of work, there was hardly anybody, doing anything. I mean, it was a creative town, but it was creative in a more, pleasurable fashion.
Folksy fashion. Folksy.
Well, for those who've never been to New Orleans, for those who have been, I know exactly what you're talking about. And you have to make your own thing, because there's not, there's a spirit there that's kind of pushing the kind of outsider character, but there's not like these kind of ghettoized communities that are pushing these things.
Right. Also, Tim, I mean, Vanessa said her apartment was $275. When your apartment is that cheap, you got a lot of time to be creative, because it's not that hard to raise. I mean, I think I had a house for $400, and a backyard. So you have a lot more time to be creative. And I just think that both of us at that time it was great to be with another, because I moved there knowing only one person. And then I met Caesar. He was living there. Caesar, who we just saw also, Caesar Padilla of Cherry. We met him there, and we met him through Ron Athey. And so Vanessa and I had a lot of time to conjure up different things and also experiment with them. So you got into extreme yoga also before Voodoo and then Butoh in New Orleans. Tell us a little bit about that, because I know that the yoga also, as wanting to be a more physical performer, based either on your previous dance and theater stuff. I mean, that really helped expand then going into Butoh. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so as I was doing more of this physical theater work with the text base, but doing more physical work, I wanted more training. So at about the same time, I started taking ballet again, and I started doing yoga with a woman named Alvina. At the time, very different times then, there were 2 yoga teachers in New Orleans. Whoa. And one taught Iyengar and one was Alvina. And I immediately just really went to that. My mother had done yoga, which was interesting for a Catholic military family. She got into yoga and health stuff, so I knew it. But then when I started practicing, it was a great meditation. It was a great clarity. And I find that I needed the physical work for my intensity and struggle to go.
A centering. And
yes. And a grounding, and also, connective tissue, connecting to more than just what was spinning around in my head. And so, and I actually started teaching within a couple of years of practicing because I was so serious about it.
I know there's many different philosophies and schools of yoga. Can I ask you, what was it? What was it? Hatha? I mean, I don't know a ton, but what was it exactly?
It was Hatha that Alvina was doing. I did eventually get into Ashtanga as a practice. I never traveled to India or, did some of the more, I wouldn't say hardcore, but I didn't follow it as a life path, but I found it to be a very valuable practice for how rigorous it was.
And it must have also helped with when then you decided to go into Butoh. But tell us then, so you're doing the yoga, we're doing the spoken word. You're also, then you got into voodoo. And
New Orleans,
I really loved when you mixed the voodoo dance with the Butoh dance. Tell us a little bit about that connection, or when those two started to coincide.
I went to a public ceremony with Mambo Sally-Ann Glassman in New Orleans. I had known of her, but I was just kind of drawn to go. And generally the houses are self-contained, obviously, but Sally-Ann would do certain performances for the public. There was one that was with Ogu, who is a law of protection for like neighborhood protection. And then there was a very important one every summer for Erzulie Dantor, who is called upon for protection from hurricanes. And so I went to these one summer and was just immediately drawn to it. I remember, I'd never worn white since I got my first communion or some shit. And it was like, wear a white dress. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like running around trying to find a white dress. I'd never even gone before, but somehow this was important. And so I was just drawn into that house. And along that path, there was a need for more people to drum and to try to learn a little bit the traditional Afro-Haitian rhythms. So I actually did do that. And so a lot of the time that I was involved in that, I was actually a drummer. Not a great one, but I did play.
Vanessa's very musical. I'm not going to stand by that.
Sure.
statement.
I mean, well, the Haitian, that stuff can get pretty complicated too. So it's cool. But it's what's also interesting about how complex that stuff can get. It's also very inclusive. So it's an interesting collision of the music experience culturally.
So how long were you studying with voodoo, and then when did the Butoh come in?
I'm thinking voodoo was something around, it's been definitely around 20 years since I first found that. And so I stayed connected to, I stayed with that house and I've stayed connected to them. I did go to Haiti probably 17 years ago, initiated there with our Haitian Papa, and who has since passed. And I keep connected to that house. It's a big river in my life. I had known about Butoh through seeing Sankai Juku and doing a workshop, but my beginning with doing this really came through being a lover of improvised music. And in New Orleans in particular, there's a musician, Rob Cambry, who would bring a lot of incredible artists to New Orleans. Peter Broadsman, William Parker and Hamid Drake, Mats Gustafsson. I was privy to a lot of this amazing music, and I would always move. It was just what I did when I heard it. It was, for me, that was my response. When Peter Koval did a tour of the United States and did a residency in New Orleans, Rob thought, I'm going to put together these different things, do you want to do a movement set with him in my living room? Like, okay, I've never done this particular as a performance, just movement, improvisation. And for 1 hour, we improvised. And even though I wasn't studying Butoh, I would call that my first Butoh performance, because it was absolute deep listening. It was absolute listening for the transmission from the alchemy between, and here I was getting to do this with an absolute master. It was just a gift. And so somewhat thereafter, Donald Miller moved to New Orleans, and he and Rob Cambry and I began a trio. So I was already doing this kind of improvised music movement with their music. We were just together, and I would respond as an instrument. That's what I felt like this was. And I happened to see a Butoh artist that traveled to town. And then I was like, I want to know more about how you approach this. And that's when I started to really study and learn Butoh.
Well, it was amazing to see your movement at the Retrovirus gigs recently. And it's also incredible that Tim is working with a Butoh performer right now as well. And for people that don't know what it is, can you just describe a little, and also describe some of your early or your most masterful performances with Butoh? I mean, to me, it is the dance of death, but in this life and transformation. I mean, you put it in your words because you're the expert in it. This is just what I see as an audience.
Butoh was founded initially by Tatsumi Hijikata in Japan, also Kazuo Ono, a dancer with whom he closely worked. Hijikata was very inspired, and it's interesting because there's rich textual inspiration for Butoh. Hijikata was extremely inspired by the writings of Jean Genet, also Antonin Artaud. He also worked closely with someone who had translated the Marquis de Sade.
You're naming all my favorites. I mean, incredible. I had no idea.
Favorites.
I had no idea that those writers inspired the master Butoh. What year was this that he started doing the Butoh, and inspired by Genet and de Sade and Artaud, my favorite?
And lest I forget, also Mishima, the first Butoh performance was in 1959 called Forbidden Colors, based on a Mishima work. And I think it was very short, and it was done at a dance festival. And Yoshito Ono, who's Kazuo Ono's son, crushed a chicken between their legs, whether it was alive or already gone, they didn't know. But, this incredible event happening. And then thereafter, Hijikata began working with other dancers. His great work, The Revolt of the Body, this long solo performance, very powerful. And he also worked closely with Kazuo Ono. They did a Genet piece together. And Kazuo Ono continued to teach and to perform, into his 90s and beyond.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Excuse me, Tim, 1 second. It's interesting that Genet had a play called The Blacks, and Butoh is basically white body paint and white costumes. But that connection is very bizarre.
Well, talking about connection, I mean, you're talking about what led you there were the great improvisers of music, particularly of the jazz idiom. And 1959, that's Ornette Coleman's Shape of Jazz to Come. I mean, it's this kind of collective consciousness, even though no one's necessarily aware that this is happening all at the same fucking time, but literally the same years. And and how it comes out and how it is expressed is maybe besides the point that there's some kind of universal
collective conscious or unconsciousness. You're so right, Tim. Absolutely. Because, look, everything is cyclical. There's always periods of informative, creative expansion. And that just happened to be one. I had no idea that Butoh was influenced by these writers who are some of our favorites.
And so isn't it also, just by working with Azumi Oi and just what I knew before even collaborating in such an art form, isn't there a lot of the stuff is done with no sound, no music, right? It can be almost anything. Am I wrong?
It can be almost anything, and there's a lot of site-specific work.
Yep.
My teacher, whom I met, I was kind of introduced to Butoh, went out to Albuquerque specifically to collaborate with a woman named Efia and her partner, whom I had met in New Orleans and hosted for a workshop, and we kind of went out to collaborate. And shortly after that, came back to New Orleans, traveled to Europe, and at a festival in Germany, met my primary teacher at Atsushi Takenouchi, who works closely with his partner, Hiroko Komiya, who is a musician. So that was always sound-based, and other that I had come into contact with was very sound-based. Not so much knowledge about, like, Kazuo Ono would use a lot of recorded sound, and even like the Beatles or Bach or something like this. There was not specific music. However, you've talked about Men Tanaka. Of course, Men Tanaka worked with many incredible jazz artists. I mean, in the Milford Graves film, you see him going to Japan to work with men and, special needs students of his, and it's this whole beautiful sequence. So it really is interesting, the difference between who does what in terms of sound.
But I'm just curious, did things like capoeira ever attract you? I mean, kind of like fighting movement and military kind of dance.
Yes.
At the time I came across capoeira in New Orleans, I loved it, but it's also its own community. And there I was,
totally,
okay, I have the yoga, I have this, I have that.
Yeah.
I just didn't really have the time. However, I did get into Aikido in Seattle, and I do Aikido.
So back to the voodoo Butoh combo, which I thought was very interesting because voodoo being a very spiritual thing, but also very physical. I mean, whether it's the drumming or the dancing or the possession or the giving over, and Butoh being a very interior expansion, in a sense, of an emotional, a slow-mo emotional experience, I guess, to perform and to witness. So this was consecutive. You were doing both these things during that period in New Orleans. When did you decide to start teaching?
I started teaching for my teacher just as a substitute, and then had a little bit regular classes. And then after the time that I was in Albuquerque studying Butoh, I came back and then kind of started teaching in some other places in New Orleans, which was great. I mean, it was just really great to be able to do that. And it was a way for me to deal with people. I mean, I found that I could really care about people and offer something to them when I experienced them in their bodies. There was kind of a vulnerability and immediacy that wasn't happening when dealing with people, just the personalities. So it was immediately I loved it just from the beginning.
Well, and also as somebody that has expressed or felt, physical body dysmorphia when you were younger, I think that getting into all of these disciplines really helped you to grow, not only as an artist, but to expand and understand the limitations or the constraints put on women by society for a perfect ideal, which doesn't frickin' exist. As I like to say, every slight imperfection a new delicacy, and so I think that was very good. And then when you can also bring people into their body, because we're so out of our bodies, so ungrounded, and that's, what yoga does is quiet down, breathe, stretch, feel, release. And in a sense, it's the same as Butoh. Some of the same elements apply to that as well.
Yes, you get to come back. You get to come back and, have your experiences, which the dysmorphia, the fear, all of this steals it. It steals your experience of yourself, of your life. This is what trauma does. It takes it away, and you're in this holding pattern of just trying to protect yourself as best you can. But that in itself is dissociative, and the dissociations run deep.
Well, and exactly. And trauma as a constraint, a prison of somebody else's making that you get locked in. And then with yoga, which is the opening that I know that after I had like cartilage ligament surgery from pole vaulting after cheerleading and being a gymnast, I did yoga, and I'm sure that doing yoga at like 12 or 13 is what has kept me so flexible still, because it was the only thing that would build back the muscle in a leg that had atrophied from surgery and casts and all that. So doing yoga at a very early age for me, I think, is what has helped me maintain flexibility.
The vision of you pole vaulting it
I only did
so deep inside.
I was really good on the horse as a gymnast, and you can imagine me in a cheerleader outfit. But let me tell you this: I only pole vaulted once, and then I heard my cartilage and ligament rip, and that was the end of my pole vaulting career. Although I haven't been known to ride a pole.
Yeah, there's some other poles that have been vaulted.
I decided that instead of jumping 6 feet in the air, I would just jump up and down as hard as possible the next time I saw a pole my size.
Oh my God.
But so Vanessa, then you spent, so I left New Orleans and you stayed there continuing your practices and performances. And really, I mean, the same as what I did. I mean, you found places to perform, you created this, the events, and you carried on doing in the Lydian tradition. If it doesn't exist what you want to do, the place for it, you will find it and you will make it happen. And not only that, but after years of doing that in New Orleans, you then decided at one point, okay, that's enough. Then you moved to Seattle, where now you have your own performance space. Tell us a little bit about that, or what made you decide, okay, I mean, look, I feel that any city has a time limit, and I've loved to move. And you moved around a lot as a child and as a teenager. You've been in Seattle quite a while now. You've established your own theater in a space. Tell us a little bit about that, and also your teaching there in prisons.
I came up to Seattle in the winter of 2004, and it was very much kind of seeking other Butoh artists, because there were not any in New Orleans besides myself and my dance partner, Alex Rouet at the time. And I was teaching a little bit there in New Orleans, but it was definitely limited. And so the idea was to find a place where there were other artists doing this work to collaborate and learn from. And so looking at different places and expenses, ended up choosing Seattle. Over time, not so surprisingly, given my origins, a lot of my closer collaborations were formed with musicians more than other Butoh artists, though there are some folks here who I've worked with and been inspired by. But I think that because of how I feel about improvising with music and how I, feel about noise artists and sound artists, that's kind of where I really connected. And so about 11 and a half years ago, a little more than that, found this place kind of in the stadium area of Seattle, second floor live work space with a big central room, and decided to move in and begin this, theater, Teatro de la Psychomachia, which was a name that I had used for my own performances in New Orleans. The name means theater of the soul struggle. I found this word when I was traveling in Europe and went to Chartres and Cathedral, and someone talked about the soul struggle, Psychomachia, and I was just like, that's the word.
Well, and verbally, accurately, gorgeously explained once again on your album Pariah, which is on Bandcamp. You've been we are all dealing with this, victims of the trauma of birth. And it's interesting to me that you went from a spoken word, you started with theater or dance, to spoken word, to dance, to Butoh, to voodoo. And then And then also with Butoh, you've used not only music, but you've often used words as well, which is, I think is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that not unusual in Butoh? Like I know they use different kinds of music, but do they use words? Do they use text?
And mainly to date, I used it in the Lucifer performance, which you saw in Barcelona.
An amazing performance. And there
And
are a
that
lot
was-
of your works online, and we'll list some of those. Yeah.
You know, and that was kind of physical theater and certainly using Butoh training. And, you know, there are people who bring it into theater. It's interesting. One of the things that Hijikata talked about was Butoh as total theater. And the way that he would create a piece was just using textual images that the body would then embrace, drink in, and evoke as the creation of a dance work.
A different form of communication that then the individual, through the impact on the body, even if they're watching, will then translate into the words that don't need to be spoken. So
with your nomadic instincts or kind of stamp, are you going somewhere else next, or what do you see yourself in the future, location wise and maybe even artistically?
Where should we go, Vanessa? Where should we go?
I
don't know.
don't know.
I don't know.
There is no perfect place. There is no perfect
Yeah.
place.
Every day, Vanessa, I wake up and think, where's next? I'm sure you do too. A lot. Yep. I sit now in my apartment. I feel I could be anywhere. And since I'm here most of the time, if I'm not on the road, it doesn't really matter. But I am itchy as usual, as a nomad. We're itchy nomads. Something witchy, something itchy, very nomadic. So what happened during the pandemic, Vanessa? I mean, what did that do to the accomplishments? Well, first of all, talk a little bit about teaching in prison and how you came about that and what you are teaching there, because you're doing theatrical performances there. But talk a little bit about teaching in prison and how you came to do that.
I knew of this organization, Yoga Behind Bars, and was able to connect and start teaching at the women's prison. That was about, I don't know, 2000, almost 10 years ago. And I was doing that, and it was really just extraordinary to just experience the depth of how people responded and what this practice could give them. And a couple of years after that, I started teaching in the men's prison as well. And it really, at the time, it wasn't explicitly trauma informed. That came a bit later. I mean, teachers were just going and teaching. But I would say that, you know, these people that I was so lucky to work with changed me more than, you know, anything in my life, in terms of really making me aware of how brutal I was inside my head toward myself. And I would go in and I would think, you know, I cannot very well keep telling people to be accepting and just, you know, be with what their body can do and explore and don't judge. And I was the opposite of all of that inside my own head.
About yourself, yes.
I realized I really have to look at walking the walk. And it also really made me investigate the unconscious hierarchy of what it is. I mean, I realized in so many ways I've been doing this stuff to be good at stuff. I want to be good at stuff. I want to reach a level. I want to be, and how hierarchical my thinking was. And I really have had to dismantle that and not use, you know, language that indicated that, you know, you can do this better when you're able to, but it's like, experience this and see what you can explore. And so I'm very unsuccessful on that path. I still have a lot of judgment, and I want to be really good at
and the thing is, I'm going back to your spoken word, and one of the mandatory listening experiences for women, especially, is your piece not good enough, which is put upon you by other fucking people. And what you just said was you wanted to do something you were good at. And the prison in your own mind, you saw more clearly when you actually were in the prison teaching people who were trapped not only by their life, the lack of their life experiences, but they're trapped within a trap, which you're trying to unblock by teaching them to get back in their body. Because I can't even imagine, none of us can, being in prison for 2 months, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. Somebody just got sentenced to 1,000 years in prison. I'll be talking about that on the intro soon.
Oh my God.
It's unimaginable. But then when you bring it back to the self, so many people are trapped within their own prison, which is inside their own head, whose bars were placed upon them by outside sources, mainly the fucking parents, society, bullshit, not good enough, and all that other crap. And you describe it beautifully on Pariah.
Can I, slight devil's advocate, were there any moments, if you're thinking, obsessing about, or just really considering or reflecting upon hierarchy and the satisfaction of achieving a certain level, and I guess you can maybe even superimpose competition, competitiveness on top of that, or whatever. Were there moments in time where you were satisfied with certain achievements to basically levels that you noticed that you got to, that you could actually express yourself because
that you could feel yourself, actually, that you could actually accept that you had accomplished something that you wanted to. And this is a dilemma for many people. Like, you have accomplished so much, and I'm speaking about a lot of people right now. You've accomplished so much. I know you very well, and I also know that there are some people that are just never satisfied no matter how much they do. That's, I guess, the question Tim is asking. Was there a moment? Is there a moment? Are you there now? Will you ever be there? And that's a question that the answer many people will relate to.
And to follow through that is part of the rebellion against that. It's because your realization is like, maybe I won't be satisfied unless I just rebel against the whole system altogether and dismantle the hierarchy of these systems.
So I think a first part of answering that I've really come to realize during the pandemic, with more intensive studies of CPTSD and more awareness of my own history and cycle, is part of a trauma response is positing the notion that if I become this, then I will have defeated finally for me, it's failure. I mean, I wake up in failure. I go to bed in failure is whether it's unworthiness, not good enough, but it is truly the feeling of having absolutely failed. But the thing is, when you're positing this idea of, I will become this thing that redeems myself and I will not have failed, you are by definition dissociated. You're dissociated from your own experience because you're perpetually reaching out, and that centeredness is lost to you. Now, what happens with a lot of us, if we're lucky, we're on a kind of tilt-a-whirl where we come into the beauty and the richness and the feeling that is where the art is coming and where we feel alive. But then there's but if I could just, and then we lose it again, or we take it away from.
Let me just tell you this, Vanessa, there is no competition so if you are competing with yourself, you of course strive to be the best you can be. But if the enemy inside you is always saying not good enough, and that enemy was inserted in your brain pan by outside negative forces, nuclear family, etc., how do you kill that off? I think when people realize that, especially individual artists, we are all completely unique. And if people could understand that about themselves and their art, that you're going to be the best that you can be, and there is no competition, but that is, of course, only if you have a vision. Nobody stands in competition.
Professor, going back to the whole concept of disassociation, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe one of your attractions to doing performance is the hyper presence that's involved, and that you can't even be disassociated. You're living, it's so primal in terms of just the sense of existence of that moment that you crave that. And when you're out of that moment, then the disassociation starts infecting.
It's very important to also understand what you have accomplished, that there is no competition, that you stand not alone, but amongst the sequoias, and that here we are. And this is the Lydian spin.
With the acknowledgement of the disassociation and the rebellion against the hierarchical systems in your own mind that you're trying to dismantle in order to be accepting of yourself, if you're just by acknowledging that alone, and whatever you're working towards that, are you finding yourself in a better place, finding more peace, finding just a better state of mind, just by acknowledging that and being aware of that?
I think yes, and also for me, the challenge of the responsibility has become that much more clear, because as I do that, the importance of really understanding, what is my responsibility to this art form that I've been fortunate enough to experience. What is my responsibility to do with this art form as someone who is a recipient of possibly the greatest crime in human history, which is the European invasion of the Western Hemisphere, on which we were all born, and the enslavement of African people to exploit that hemisphere. And so what do I do with my work? And that my last solo performance that I created was to try to address that and to say, how do I honor what I've known through? I've been so fortunate to experience incredible music, Butoh, Vodou, knowing all this art. It's like, what do I offer back? And I can land in that place better than when I was so concerned with how good I was doing or what I was achieving. It would get self-narrow.
Right. So it's more giving back is the ultimate thing. And if someone addresses me like, well, okay, about, there's blood on every fucking purchase you make in this country. And the amount of blood we're standing on is so deep and so long and so just endless. So it's about giving back. And it is one of my issues I have with some of the European left. It's like, well, Americans, you're working so hard. And what about relaxing? It's like
the lying flat movement of China.
You better participate. It's actually, you have to, you better participate at this point, because it's an insult if you're not actively engaged. At least I believe with the gifts are giving that have been given to us. And so how do you do that? You give back.
So well put, Tim. Exactly. So well put.
Because it's our duty to give back.
Well, it is our duty to sally forth and bring out the issues in whatever format of creativity we can manifest will need to be addressed. And the issues remain the frickin' same. And the traumas placed upon us, which make great artists for the most part. Not every great artist has been traumatized, but I can not think of any that haven't been right now, is to just understand that there's so many other people in the same situation. And it is also what has saved me a lot of fucking distress is none of our situations, and teach in prison for a while, or even just speaking about prison when I did, taught me a good lesson about how much worse, having an understanding of really how wretched this fucking planet has forever been, this country forever will be, the export of murder and madness, the patriarchal bullshit, old rich men telling us what to do every step of the fucking way. I've rebelled against it. I encourage everybody else to rebel against it. Kill the fucking hierarchy inside your head and outside of your head, because it is not our reality. It's just what imposes itself upon us, like fucking parents have, like social constructs have. And I won't fucking buy it. And that's why we do the Lydian Spin. And this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, Vanessa Skantze, Pariah on Bandcamp, Psychomachia. We will have links. I love you, my sister.
Love you too.